Welcome to the Australian Business Executive Podcast, where we speak with Australia's most influential industry professionals on the business and economic development issues taking place across the country. You can stay up to date with all our content, including our magazines, podcasts and videos by visiting www.theabe.com.au and clicking on subscribe.
Today's guest is Flowerdale Flowers Director Rob Sadler. Rob, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jess.
So, give us an overview of Flowerdale Flowers.
So, Flowerdale Flowers, we're a family-run business in Tasmania, and we're just coming up for our 40 years next year. So, we basically produce cut flowers and sell them all over Australia, and we're based in Tassie with around about 30 odd employees.
Fair enough. Tell us the story of how you got involved, because it's a multi-generational family business.
So my father was a dairy farmer, and he wanted to diversify into something that he had a little bit more control over. So about 20 years ago, we decided to get into flower bulb production and cut flower sales, and we started with small igloos, and then we've now built up to about 3 hectares under cover, under glass, and supplying all over Australia.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. And what are the main products? And I think you're kind of explaining that now. And who's your market?
So we grow lilies and tulips, and we distribute them all over Australia. Our market is 65% goes to what we call the wholesale market, and they retail to florists and retail outlets. They're based in the capital cities. And look, around about 30 to 35% of our product also goes to the major supermarkets who we'd have contracts with.
So give us an overview about horticulture in Australia and where you see your position in the market.
So horticulture, or floriculture, which is the growing of flowers, of course, is around about an $800 million industry in Australia. It's really centered on some major events. So we've got Mother's Day, Christmas, Valentine's Day. On a day like Mother's Day, we might be 3 or 4 times our production. And of course, we've only got a very small window to get the timing right. So that's a very important factor. Probably one of the most important things is to just have consistency of quality and supply. And that's why we've got everything under very high-tech glass houses. The industry is, I guess if we wanted to talk about the last 18 months, and of course with what's happened with COVID-19, but it's been probably a 30% increase in global supply for flowers. Now that's across all markets, and our industry's never seen anything like that. Of course, we aren't able to keep up with that demand, but it's been a bit of a phenomenon, really, to see so much growth in flowers, and it's basically because people are stuck at home in lockdowns and are wanting to brighten up their houses.
It's interesting because just before we turned on the mic, you were kind of explaining how flowers are effectively kind of a barometer for how well the economy is going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's in our market, if there's an interest rate rise, we see that the next day in our flower sales and the demand and the pull through of those products. So we can sort of see exactly what is happening in the broader economy by how well our sales are going. And of course, when there's so much liquidity in the markets and so many people have got so much money and they're sort of locked at home, can't go overseas, an affordable luxury like flowers it becomes a real reality for them on a weekly basis. So they buy, and I think that's a reflection of probably the economy as well. Of course, when the money runs out, we see the opposite. So it does get ugly as well.
Let's talk about the product itself. I assume that there's got to be a few competitors in the space. I believe that you told me that you guys are a top 3 producer. We'll talk about the quality, but how many people exist in the industry, and how have you been able to get to that position within top 3 in the country?
So probably 20 or 30 years ago, it was a very fragmented market. There was lots of players and very small nurseries. And I guess in the last sort of 20 years, there's been a lot of consolidation and a lot of growth, and the bigger have, of course, got bigger. It's a general trend in agriculture, of course, but especially in high-intensity horticulture, it's happened a lot. And I guess we just kept investing in infrastructure, and we kept building good facilities, and we've been able to sort of position ourselves well in the top 3 or 4 flower growers of lilies and tulips in Australia, which is a nice position to be in. That was sort of our motivation at the time.
And so let's talk a little bit about, achieving a consistent level of that quality. Because I think originally when we discussed the story, even one of my questions was, how do you transport these? I assume they've got to go all over the country. So keeping them fresh and sort of getting them prepared for sale. So
everything's about continuity and consistency of supply. There is still a lot of growers that have good quality, but only for very short periods of time. But we concentrate on having that quality all year round and making sure that consistency is there. And of course, under a glass house, we grow very high quality product. Everything is very scheduled. So we would harvest, cool the product, bunch the product, and pack it out all within 48 hours. And that would be palletized, and it basically gets distributed all over Australia within sort of 4 or 5 days. I think Melbourne's 1 day, Sydney's 2 or 3 days, Brisbane's 3 or 4 days. So it's really important that we have a very consistent level of temperature. We don't use air freight. We use everything on the road, because air freight, obviously the temperature is up and down a lot. So even though it's much quicker. So it's, Australia's a big country, but we've actually got a relatively good logistical chain that keeps the product nice and cool, gets it to market.
Now, before we're starting to get the pointy or the back end of our conversation, there's quite a lot of things happening at an industry level at the moment as well, isn't there?
There's a lot of stuff happening. There's definitely permanent changes with the buying habits of people. So whether this demand continues with more people staying at home, working from home, more people, of course, getting into the habit of buying flowers, we do feel that's happening. I think there's generally a global change in the industry as well. I think there's this is happening across all markets. So it's getting more difficult to get hold of the seed and the bulbs. So that's causing problem. It's inflating the prices of the bulbs. So there's another issue going on there. Sea freight sea freight's becoming expensive, which is causing problems in getting bulbs and things and transport of the flowers around the country. And also a lot of flowers were imported from overseas and flown in. So with no air freight at the moment, we have air freight, but without passenger planes and the subsidised freight that goes in the bellies of those planes, the flowers are becoming more expensive from places like Kenya and Malaysia, China, Vietnam. So that has impacted the prices in Australia. So it has, in a sense, given a bit of a free kick to the Australian growers, and it all depends on how we sort of take that on board, I guess.
Fair enough. And how do you think that will impact you guys in your future? Does that give you a fairly positive outlook now that distribution is back continentally on Australia?
Well, I think people are finding ways, in the end, market economics always wins. So I guess once maybe the market settles down a bit, I'm sure that those flowers will come back into the Australian market. But it is giving us a little bit of an incentive to reinvest in some of our and expand. It's a very difficult space because you don't know whether in the future whether people's buying habits will stay the same with the purchasing of flowers, or whether they will go back to normal. But most likely there'll be a middle ground, I'd imagine.
Okay.
But definitely the importation of flowers from overseas will go down a little bit, I'm sure.
Fair enough. And before we finish today, Rob, is there anything else that you haven't had a chance to address or would like to mention?
No, not really. Just I think that we'll see this sort of shift onto a lot of agricultural and horticultural products in Australia, where things become more localised, and people are definitely demanding more local products and demanding local flowers, and they're asking questions about where their fresh produce is coming from, and making conscious decisions about is it right to fly flowers from Kenya or somewhere else when we could definitely grow them in Australia. It may be 5 or 10% more expensive, but I think that's a change that's definitely happening out there in the market.
Excellent. Well, Rob, thanks very much for your time today.
No worries. Thank you.
This has been a production of the Australian Business Executive, a division of Romulus Rising Proprietary Limited. All rights reserved. You can stay up to date with the Australian Business Executive, including our magazines, podcasts and videos, by visiting www.theabe.com.au and clicking on subscribe.